Right, well, hello everyone. We shall be making a start now. So a warm welcome to you all and thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to start by making a brief introduction, if we may, just so that you know who you are listening to. So if you haven't joined us before, then my name's Karen. I'm the HR Knowledge Manager for HR Solutions, and I'm the lead presenter for this webinar session today. And I am joined by my colleague, Ateem. She is here in the background to collate any questions that you might have as we go. So if you do have any, please pop them over to us and you can just use your control panel to do that in the questions section. Also, and hopefully of course there won't be any, but if you should have any technical problems in the session, then you can send her a message and she can see if there's anything we can do our end to support you. So that's that. We are going to be recording the session as well, so you will be able to log on to our website and watch this again at any point, and we would, welcome you to watch it again and share it with your colleagues, so feel free to do that if you would like to. And as always, we make the slide deck available upon request afterwards, so if that would be useful, please do drop us a message and we'd be very happy to send it over to you. All right, so this is what we're going to be covering today. We're looking at the brand new Acas Guidance on age discrimination. I'm going to start by just sort of bringing to the forefront really the reasons why it's important for us to be aware of this guidance and what it says, and then we'll be looking at the following areas which it discusses. And it's always good to start out by thinking about what you're trying to achieve. So we've got a few aims, some of them for me, and maybe you'll agree that they're appropriate for you as well. But I want to just introduce you to the new Acas Guidance on age discrimination and help to understand why it's important for us to be aware of it. You are watching this, so you probably don't need to really preach to you too much. We're also going to understand the types of discrimination and what is meant by age when we're talking about it in terms of equality. Hopefully we'll have just raised awareness a bit of how age discrimination can actually arise, okay, and just remind ourselves of some age-related issues that can come up in working life as we go. So there we are. I'm going to start by involving you pretty early on, actually, and I'm going to put a question to you just to see what the scope is really of this subject on those who are listening, and I'd like to ask what your experience is of age discrimination. Okay, so how has it affected you, or things that you've seen in relation to the world of work anyway? So I am just going to launch our first poll today. So you should be able to see some options up on screen. So I have had to handle complaints of discrimination. So have you had to deal with any complaints of age discrimination? I have witnessed ageist remarks in the workplace. Okay, so not necessarily where you're working right now, but have you ever witnessed ageist remarks when you're in work yourself? I think I have been treated differently due to my age before. So again, not necessarily where you are now, but just perhaps in a past job, maybe where you are now, or when you're applying for a job, or how clients have treated you, or what have you. And lastly, I've seen job adverts that have implied a preferred age. So if you'd just like to jot down all, if you think you've experienced them all, or just the ones that have impacted you, it'd be really interesting to see how we're affected by this topic. So I think we've got half of you voted. I'll just give you sort of five more seconds. We've got 3/4 of you now. That's great. Okay, so we've got pretty much all of you in now, so I'm just going to close that and just share the results that we've got. So let's have a look. Few people have had to handle complaints of age discrimination today. Okay. About 56 and nearly 60% have witnessed ageist remarks at work, so that's the majority. 22% have been treated differently themselves, they think. So we've got nearly a quarter of people, which is quite a lot. It's higher than it should be, definitely. And just 1 or 2 people have seen job adverts that implied a preferred age, so not quite so many people there see anything like that. Okay, so I'm just going to hide those and carry on then with our slides today. So it's quite interesting. I think I've definitely, experienced pretty much all of those things, to be honest, myself in my working life. So let's just look at the guidance and, why this is something we need to be aware of. And I think we do need to just do a very quick recap on the basics of discrimination to be able to do this, just to help me explain why it's important to know about what may easily be perceived by many as, just another set of rules to make our lives difficult. So, okay, discrimination then. Discrimination generally is less favourable or unfair treatment because of a protected characteristic. Okay, you can't be discriminated for anything, in law anyway. It has to be related to a protected characteristic. And in the UK, we have 9, okay, one of which is, of course, age. And in Acas's own words, age discrimination is unlawful from when a role is advertised through to the last day of employment and even beyond, okay, including job references. So what this means is actually there is no minimum length of service required to bring a claim for age discrimination. And indeed, people who aren't yet even employed by us or have been but aren't any longer can bring claims for discrimination based on how they're treated, okay? So it's important also to remember that both employers and employees can be liable for their own acts of discrimination. Okay, so sometimes employers are also liable for the acts of their employees, and this is known as vicarious liability. All right, and vicarious liability can be avoided if the employer can show that they took all reasonable steps to prevent the discrimination from happening. Okay, so there's a few interesting things here. Individuals can be held personally liable, okay, not just the organisation as a whole. So that might be surprising, but it's important for us to be aware of that. And we can be held responsible, even if we've done everything right as employers. If our employees have discriminated against another employee, we could still potentially be liable for that, okay? So we've got to try and put things in place to prevent it from happening in the first place. And, it can seem like quite a big expectation of us, do we have to see into the future and become mind readers to preempt, what's going to happen and prevent it? Well, no, because now, for the first time ever, we have a guide from Acas about age discrimination specifically, okay? Of course, we don't have to be mind readers, but we ought to be aware of some of the more prevalent issues and what it is expected we should be doing to try and minimise that from happening. Now, Acas, for those of you who might not be familiar with them, they're the Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service, okay? And they are a leading authority on workplace practices. And it is their job to produce advice and guidance on workplace relations and to provide us with statutory codes of practice, okay? Now, tribunals will look to Acas codes of practice and guidance, and they will typically expect employers to have followed the advice that they publish. So what this means then is that those who wish to avoid vicarious liability should definitely be proactive with this new guidance. But, it goes without saying, there's of course many other reasons why we should care about this guidance other than just avoiding a claim for vicarious liability. Many employers just want to treat all staff fairly, regardless of age, and quite rightly. Most employers want to create an inclusive workplace, want to educate themselves about discrimination. And many of us feel we're pretty much there, but we're also aware of how it can happen accidentally, and there's this concept of unconscious discrimination or unconscious bias, and we want to make sure we're doing what we can to avoid that from happening. And of course, we just want to avoid falling foul of a discrimination claim in general, against the company, and even having to go there in the first place. So, any employers really who are wishing to ensure fairness, to make the workplace inclusive and to avoid possible claims, should really familiarise themselves with this new guide and look to make any adaptations really accordingly. So if you did want to have a look at the full guide, it provides clarity on what age discrimination is, the types of age discrimination that can occur. They've identified common risk areas and further considerations, advice to prevent age discrimination, and also advice on how to deal with it if it happens. Okay, and we're going to look at some of these things today. So if you want to go straight to the website itself, this is where you would need to go. The full guide can be downloaded as a PDF, and this is the link for that. Now you can just perhaps take a second to get a screenshot of this information to save you scribbling it down frantically. Or if you are trying to jot it down and your hand's aching, or you think, oh, I'm just going to forget that, well, you could watch this session again online, or you can Google Acas Age Discrimination PDF, which I've tested myself the other day, and it came up second, I think. So that might be a bit easier for you to remember and save you jotting it down. But it is 27 pages long, so you're going to have to put some time aside if you want to read through it in one sitting. But anyway, hopefully this session today is going to bring it to life for you a little bit more, and also just introduce you to some of the key takeaways, or certainly the key takeaways that I had from it anyway. So let's look at how the guide starts, and it starts by thinking about age and the topics of discrimination, the main types. So let's introduce ourselves to the concept of age in terms of equality. Okay, it's a small word, but what do we mean by it when we're talking about age or different age or age group? Okay, so generally, employees are protected against unfair treatment because they are a particular age. Okay, so let's say this person is 66. They're protected because they're in a particular age group. Okay, so a group of people, for example, who are termed as being below 25. They're protected because they're thought to be a particular age for whatever reason. Okay. So like take this image here, at first glance, I think we typically tend to see this image as a person who's in a later stage of life, probably because of the walking stick, but they could of course be any age whatsoever. And they're also protected because they're associated with someone belonging to a particular age group, such as babies, for example. Okay. So there's 4 different things there that we mean by age, and 4 different ways in which someone's protected from unfair or less favourable treatment because of age. So what this means then is that age discrimination or ageism, it's not always necessarily about an old person being preferred over a young person or vice versa. It can mean actually, when you're comparing treatment, that an age difference could be very small. So, for example, if you had a group for some reason of 40 to 49-year-olds, a 50-year-old could feel very segregated from that group. And I've just wanted to add in my own reminder there, that's not in the guide, but it is possible for the person who is alleged to have discriminated, okay, to be the same age as the person who's making the complaint about the discrimination, okay? They can possess the exact same characteristic, be the same age or in the same age group. So that's age. And now let's just look at the main types of discrimination. So there are 4 main types of discrimination. The first is direct, and this is probably or tends to be the most common, or the one we most commonly think of anyway. And it's when someone is treated less favourably because of a protected characteristic. Okay. This type of discrimination also includes discrimination by association. So when we had that picture of the person with a baby, you know, if you're discriminated because you're associated with another age group, even if you're not that age yourself. And it also includes discrimination because of perception. So that one where someone might be treated less favourably because they're thought to be a particular age. You know, they might look a particular age, even though actually they aren't that age. Okay, they can still bring a claim for direct discrimination, even though they are not that age that they're being treated poorly because of. The second type is indirect discrimination. Okay, now indirect discrimination happens when there's a practice that applies equally to everybody, which may not in itself appear to be discriminatory on the surface, okay, but that practice actually disadvantages people with a particular protected characteristic, or those with a particular age or belonging to a particular age group. Okay, and this is one where employers can tend to fall foul without realizing. The third is harassment. Okay, harassment is unwanted conduct. It has the purpose or the effect of violating someone's dignity, creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment for them. Okay, and harassment in terms of discrimination can be a single act. That is possible. And lastly, we have victimization. Now, employees often use this word incorrectly when they're talking about treatment anyway, but victimization is when someone suffers a detriment because they have made or they might support an allegation of discrimination. Okay, so if someone might make a discrimination claim and they're treated differently or detrimentally because of it, you know, that's not okay. This piece of law is really to protect somebody who's trying to, you know, say, look, the law here is to protect me from being discriminated against. I am being discriminated against, and they're treated less favourably for trying to assert, you know, they should be treated fairly, basically. All right, so these are the 4 main types of discrimination that we have in law. So I'm going to put a question to you now, so I hope you're paying attention in that last section. I'm going to pose a question, and there are multiple answers, and you can select all the ones that you think are right. Okay, so the question is, a discrimination claim is possible when someone is. Okay, and you can select all the ones that you think are true. So let's launch that. So you can select all the ones that you think might be true. So a discrimination claim is possible when someone is treated badly for being an age that they actually are not. Dismissed because they might raise a complaint about ageism. Mocked for being in a relationship with someone who is much younger than they are. Or a discrimination claim is possible when someone is required to have any degree in order to apply for a job. Okay, so that's a degree level qualification in absolutely anything before you can apply for this job. So I'm just going to give you a few more seconds to answer that. We've had a bit of a rush of people answering on this one. I'm quite keen. So I'll just give you a few more seconds if you're just having a think, about 10 more seconds. Hey, we've got most of you. If you just want to have a ditch at anything else, then have a go. Okay, great. So let's close that and share what we think. So everyone's put the top one is a possible discrimination claim. Most people are thinking that if someone's dismissed because they might raise a complaint about ageism is possible grounds for discrimination claim. Just over 3/4 think that it's possible to claim discrimination if you're mocked for being in a relationship with someone much younger, and about 40% on the last one. Okay, great. So I'm just going to hide that then and show you the answers. So they're actually all true, and we got quite a heavy weighting for most of them. So I think we've done pretty well there as a group today. A discrimination claim is possible, okay, if someone's treated badly for being an age they actually are not. We've got 100% on that, so that's fantastic. This is the direct discrimination claim because they're perceived to be an age that they're actually not, okay, so that's great. We got pretty much everyone clocked that this could be a discrimination claim, and it could, okay? This would potentially be victimization, okay? If we are starting to get wind, you know, even if, you know, relatively new employee is potentially going to raise a claim about being treated differently because of their age, and we let them go, okay, they could potentially have grounds to claim that they've been victimized because they were going to complain about discrimination. Being mocked for in a relationship, yeah, so this is a bit more of a practically applied example. This potentially could be harassment, okay? If somebody's made to feel, you know, humiliated for being associated with somebody of a certain age group, then absolutely that could potentially be grounds for harassment. You know, particularly if the environment is made to be hostile, you know, and degrading for them. I'm required to have any degree in order to apply for a job. So I don't know if I've just sort of made people think twice about that and hesitate about their answer, but this absolutely could be grounds for a claim, okay? This is the one where it's indirect discrimination, okay? It's a rule, okay? You've got to have a degree to apply for this job. You're applying that equally to everybody. But actually, if you think about it, it is the case that this is likely to put an age group, normally older workers, at a particular disadvantage because degrees are just so vastly common amongst younger generations. You know, it just wasn't something that was considered necessary, you know, a few generations ago. So having that rule in a job advert is potentially saying we don't want, you know, older workers. So it's something to be conscious of. So let's move on then and have a look at the areas Acas have identified as being some of the more common areas where age discrimination happens. So they've identified no fewer than 9 areas where it's likely to occur, and when you have a look down the list there, it covers a lot of the employee life cycle actually. So we've got recruitment, training, promotion, pay and terms and conditions of employment, performance management, redundancy, retirement, dismissal, and lastly we've got flexible working as well. So there's some really key areas that probably come up quite a lot for all of us. that is discussed in the guidance. I'm not going to have time to talk about them all now, but just wanted to highlight your awareness that they are there. So we're going to have a look at a few of these now, though, because I think there's some particularly handy tips we can take. And let's start with recruitment then. This is the area where actually there was the most advice available in the Acas guide for avoiding age discrimination in recruitment. So we begin with writing the essential documents. So this is things like job specification, the job advert, and so on, okay? So Acas say that employers should avoid suggestions that applicants should be in a particular age group, okay? So avoid images that just show young people or that use phrases like graduate position, okay? Because that's going to indicate that you're looking for a younger person. Even if you think the job is probably going to be suited toward a graduate, we shouldn't rule out other people who might be interested. Actually advertising the role then, so they advise that we use 2 different channels as a minimum so that we're reaching a broad scope of ages, okay? Be careful if you just want to use word of mouth. So if you're asking existing employees to recommend, people they might know, particularly if your existing staff are in the same age group, because it's most likely that they're friends with people of a similar age to them. So you're just going to inadvertently be continuing, to only fish from a pond of people of a certain age group. Pinpointing skills, experience and qualifications for the job. I think this can be quite a problem area for employers, especially in terms of the word experience, but there's some handy advice that comes up here. So they recommend that we're very clear on the skills required, okay? And I would suggest that we really focus on the skills required for the job right at the start before we even start looking. And that might sound obvious, and you might even think you do it, but I would certainly recommend that you involve people who are actually doing the job, in identifying what those skills are objectively rather than what you think they are. Because if you're having to do it retrospectively once you've got a candidate sat in front of you, you might start to get yourself into problems. You might start to have issues with unconscious bias coming in and so on and so forth. Okay, so right from the start, set out what the job needs objectively and then use that to write the skills that are required when you're pinpointing skills in a job specification or in your interview requirements. Avoid asking for X amount of years experience, okay? So rather than saying, we think someone's going to need to have at least 6 years experience in doing this job before they're really going to be able to hit the ground running as we need, in this department. Instead of going that way round about it, describe the type of experience that's needed. All right, it may well be the case, it might not be as common, but it may well be the case that somebody with less experience than you would expect is actually very capable and very able to demonstrate and perform, with the expectations that you have for that role. So give them a chance to do that. Only ask for necessary qualifications, okay? If you don't need certain qualifications for the job, they're not essential, consider not asking for them, okay? And consider whether or not there are different ways in which somebody can demonstrate their aptitude. So could they give you equivalent qualifications to what you're asking for? So just think about keeping your language very open, that, we would expect that somebody qualified to this level or equivalent would be appropriate, very open language. In terms of apprentices and trainees, we do have the requirement in law that apprentices must be 16 or over, but really there shouldn't be any other age restrictions. And we should also look to avoid phrases like overqualified, okay, and too much experience. Now, they're not saying we can't do that. I think it's probably a common bit of feedback that we give candidates, which is fine, but you've got to be very careful because if you don't really know what you mean by it, or you're just churning it out, you know, it can indicate that you're looking for someone younger, and it would be difficult for you to justify that that's not what you meant after the case or after the fact, you know, if you've not already got your objective reasons set out as to why you think somebody who's overqualified wouldn't be appropriate, okay? And in fact, there's probably actually other reasons, or you probably actually mean something else. So try and really pinpoint what it is that makes one candidate preferable over another. If you're using an application form, and you might be doing this already from all the, you know, data protection scaremongering that GDPR brought, but you might want to avoid asking for age. Just don't ask for it. You know, date of birth, same thing. Dates of education, same thing. You know, we can work out someone's age from that potentially. So just avoid it unless you have a genuine occupational requirement. All right. So I've highlighted that word because we will have a look at it a little bit later on. Such a requirement might be, you know, that you need, and I really mean need, to check that training is still relevant and up to date. Okay, so in care, for example, there'd be a requirement that you have up to date manual handling training. You know, you're not going to let somebody handle a vulnerable person, you know, who's not got relevant and up to date training. You know, so that would be a real need for that. Okay, so that would be justified. Sticking with recruitment then, just for a little bit longer, if you use social media, okay, so if you use social media to have a little look at a job candidate before they start or come in for interview, just be careful not to note their age down, okay, because that could be a data protection issue. Also, just be aware, if you're posting jobs on social media, that if you use one site, you know, some tend to be more popular with different age groups than others. So again, you might want to be using different ones. And also, if you were to use any filtering tools that are based on age, that's also likely to be discriminatory. Now, when you are interviewing, don't ask for age. If an applicant should give you their age, just try to put that detail out of your mind and to one side, okay? Now, ideally, interviewers should be trained to avoid asking discriminatory questions and making discriminatory assumptions as well, okay? Just to give you some examples, because I think it's easy to say that, but it doesn't mean a lot without any sort of practical take on it. If you were concerned about how somebody who appears to be younger than what you might expect, you know, to be applying for or interested in a role, and you have some reservations about how they might be able to effectively manage people who are older than themselves, instead of being that blunt about it, ask them to explain, you know, how they or what management experience they have. Okay, ask them to explain how they've adapted to a situation, you know, rather than what they might know about new technology. Okay, because questions about technology tend to get asked toward older candidates because there seems to be an expectation they might not be familiar with it sometimes. Or equally, an assumption might be made in an interview that a young person would know all about technology, you know, and that's not necessarily the case. So instead of asking generalized stereotypes questions like that, ask how they've adapted, ask about their experience instead, and leave examples open. When seeking job references, so a referee, you know, and this applies to us if we're acting as a referee, you know, we should never give a negative reference that's subjective anyway, you know, but certainly not a negative reference that is based on an applicant's age. Okay, we should be objective. We're talking about their capability. We're not assuming that any of that is linked to their age. Okay, if you do get a negative reference that's because of age, then you must not discriminate based on it. And that can be tough because once you've read a negative reference, you're sort of default is to think, we've got alarm bells about this person. But if it's negative because of age, we cannot treat them differently based on that information. We need to find another reason, you know, that is as strong as would stand up to that negative reference based on age for not employing them, if that's what you decided to do. You might ignore it and give them a chance. When you're actually offering the job, appoint the best applicant for the job. It might sound obvious, but if you are doing that every time and you're doing it objectively and you're documenting the reasons why you've ruled out other people and why you are picking this person, okay, you can't go too far wrong. If you had any reservations for whatever reason, you know, if you thought they're in a different age group to the rest of the team, I'm a bit worried they're not going to fit in, you know, these people like to go out a lot, I'm not sure this the person in this age group is going to want to go to those places that they do, you know, don't offer less attractive terms, don't offer a longer probation period because you're worried they might not fit in, okay? Offer the same terms that you would offer to anybody. And lastly, on recruitment then, if you use recruitment agencies, which many of us do, just remember, you know, recruitment agents have also got to comply with the Equality Act. They shouldn't be discriminating. You know, they shouldn't really be passing on details of a person's age to us, actually. Acas advise that employers tell agencies that they would prefer a range of ages, okay, in the applicants that you send through. Again, unless it's objectively justifiable, which we're going to look at in a moment or two, to specify an age. Okay, so you might just perhaps have a default template that you send to an agent, you know, when you're asking them to recruit a position for you. You maybe just slot in a line that says, we prefer a range of ages, you know, as you're sending candidates through. Brilliant. You know, you've got a tick in the box to show that you have tried to be open from the start in terms of who you employ. So looking at some other areas then, training. Now, in the next few slides in this section, we've got phrases that are based on whether or not an employer must do something, and where I've used the word must, it's a legal obligation. And we've also got phrases for things that employers should do or should avoid, okay, and that's the recommendation that Acas has given. So Acas quite rightly set out that employers must not ever deny training because of age, and they shouldn't allow bias or assumptions based on age to impact on who gets trained either. And we should really try to avoid denying training to young employees, perhaps because they don't have enough experience or perhaps because they're in low paid roles. You know, it's easy to think that a low paid role, perhaps there's not so much value in offering training there, but it tends to be younger people in lower paid roles, you know, and they can't move ahead without that sometimes. So there's that. And employers should try and ensure that all employees are aware of opportunities for training and personal development. You know, if you have that information stored centrally somewhere that everyone can access, you know, then again, you're opening it up, making it available to everybody. Just be aware that training is likely to reduce underperformance as well, you know, so there's value in us doing that. And they also advise that we should try and encourage older employees to talk to us about what training they might want, because there's a tendency for them to be reluctant in asking because they fear that they might be seen as being behind the times or that they might be underperforming compared to a younger person. So try to encourage that conversation and check that they're getting all the training that they want and need for their role. Looking at pay and terms and conditions of employment then. So Acas reminds us that we must not generally have different terms and conditions because of age, okay? If you have a job description and different terms and conditions that are attached to that, so we generally have, you know, this job role attracts this salary, they have this amount of holiday, these benefits, okay? That should apply to a person whether they are 25, you know, or 67, you know, it really doesn't matter. They ought to be getting the same terms and conditions. unless, again, you can perhaps justify it, if there's a change in the job because there's a vacancy and you need to adapt the terms, but you'd really need to be able to objectively justify that so you can show it's not because of a person's age that you've changed the terms. Now, there could be exceptions where you are paying the national minimum and national living wage, because of course there are age bandings for that. Performance management. So employers must, so legal obligation, they must ensure that if you are dismissing for underperformance, that the dismissal is based on relevant facts. Okay, so objective capability indicators. All right. What's great about that is they are just completely independent of age. Okay, sometimes people say to me, they're deteriorating, and I just do think it is because they're getting older, okay? And I understand that, but there are many people who are quote unquote older who are massively capable, and hugely fit and healthy and on the ball, so to speak, compared to a younger person even. So it's not really about age, it is about capability objectively, okay? And when we're delivering feedback about that, we've got to be very careful not to be using discriminatory language. Don't make flippant comments to somebody like, I suppose you don't really want the training, do you? Because you're probably thinking about retirement, Actually, no, actually explain that we're offering X training, to everybody that wants it. Would you like it? Okay, that would be a much better approach to have. We should be treating everyone consistently. It sounds like it goes without saying, but perhaps don't think, I'm not going to train one person because they're older, or I'm not going to performance manage one person because they're younger and just don't quite get it yet. That would be unfair on the people that you are performance managing. And if you are, assessing performance and thinking about future goals, yes, be consistent, but remember that you may need to still put reasonable adjustments in place for people who have a disability, which does tend to crop up in older age, as we're going to talk about, but could apply to anybody of any age. Redundancy. So employers must ensure that decisions about who to make redundant are based on factors such as skills, work performance, and the abilities that we need to retain in the restructured organisation. Okay, so again, it's about being as objective as possible with our selection criteria. Now, employers mustn't select staff for redundancy because they're part-time. All right, and Acas are advising that because typically older employees work part-time more often than younger employees. Okay, so this could be a discriminatory approach, again, without you even realizing it. So try to avoid making people redundant because they're part-time. Also, people on part-time work are protected against unfair treatment anyway. We must also not select younger staff for redundancy because we want to avoid higher redundancy payouts, okay? Because statutory redundancy pay is less for a younger person. Retirement. So retirement's an important one because employees have the right to retire at any age now, okay? Compulsory, retirement or employers being allowed to have a retirement age is something that was got rid of several years ago. So employers must avoid raising or prompting discussion. When you think about retiring, if you're thinking about making your own future plans and you wonder whether or not that person's still going to be there, you really shouldn't assume that because they're approaching retirement age that they will, okay? In fact, I've seen Centre for Aging Better have been quoted in an article that came out yesterday, I think, saying that employers should be advocating people to stay in employment as long as they possibly can, to keep earning, to keep putting money into the economy. They may well have people they still need to care for and support themselves, so we should be advocating that where people are still capable. And we can't treat somebody differently because they're thinking about retiring or because they have reached an age where they can get the state pension. Okay, it's up to them whether or not they resign and that they happen to make that resignation when they're eligible to claim pension. Okay, and don't think that you have the right to change terms and conditions once somebody decides to take any pension. And flexible working. So I wanted to just comment on this one because Acas, interestingly, have recommended, it's not a requirement, of course, but suggesting that employers should consider dropping the 26 weeks of service, okay, eligibility requirements, so that any employees, can look to put in a request. Not that you have to approve it, but can put in a request, from day one of employment. So if I can just get your involvement. This is a scenario that's in the guidance, and I've just adapted it a bit to shorten it briefly, but see what you think of this. So we've got 66-year-old Liang. He asked his manager if he can reduce his hours from full-time to 4 days per week so that he can look after his grandson on the other day. Now, he knows a number of people in the organisation have flexible working arrangements, such as home working, and this is particularly prevalent amongst new mums. His request is refused without any discussion whatsoever. Okay, so do we think he might be able to claim discrimination for this situation? So, what am I doing? We just select this new poll and launch it for you. So just select one. Yes, he may be able to claim age discrimination, or no, he would not be able to claim age discrimination. I'll just give you a few more seconds on that one. It's got the majority voted in now, so just give you 3 more seconds. Okay, so I'm going to close that now. Oh, last person snuck in. So we've got 100%, he may be able to claim age discrimination, 100%. Okay, so the answer is, yeah, absolutely. He may be able to claim age discrimination, okay, and this is because new mums will tend to belong to an age group that 66-year-old Liang would not be part of, okay. It's possible the employer could try to justify it, but it's very unlikely. If there was absolutely no room left for flexibility because the employer had been the most generous they possibly could be and, eked out all room for flexibility in working patterns, then maybe, if you just happened to be the one after the last possible person that could be accommodated, but that's so unlikely. And also the fact they didn't even have a conversation could mean the process alone, he was treated unfairly compared to others, regardless of the decision. So very unlikely they would be able to defend that. So when age discrimination is allowed, I thought it was important for us to have a look at this area that was highlighted in the guidance. So we're going to have a whip through. So when discrimination is lawful, sounds easy, but discrimination is not always unlawful. Direct and indirect discrimination can be objectively justified, in limited circumstances, and this is what the law calls a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. So to be able to achieve that, an employer must show that the treatment was appropriate necessary and objective, okay, and it usually needs a business need to be able to justify it, okay, but it is possible sometimes that discrimination is lawful. Now, what's proportionate will tend to vary from case to case, and it can depend on the size and resources of the business, okay. So, you know, a large organisation might find it very easy to accept flexible working requests, okay, that tend to come from older workers, for example, okay, but a smaller organisation with few staff might find that much more difficult to accept, okay, so it might not be that they're discriminating, just that the business really cannot accommodate it. Occupational requirements, so we mentioned this earlier. If it's absolutely crucial to the post and the nature of the job, you know, it's inherent, and we've got this a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim, then potentially you can have an occupational requirement to have a certain age limit or a certain requirement for a certain age with a job, okay? But if there's any possible way that the same aim could be achieved in a less discriminatory way, very unlikely occupational requirement would stand up, okay? So a good and quick example of this is needing someone who works in a bar who is going to serve alcohol to be 18 or over, okay? Very quick and easy example there. Positive action. So if we're going to treat somebody a little bit better, you know, than we might treat another age group, potentially that would be lawful. But only if we can show that the group that we're treating a little bit better is at a disadvantage and or they are in low numbers in the organisation and or they have other needs because of their age, whatever that might be. Okay, so anything that we do has got to be proportionate and can't discriminate against other people. All right, so a good example is if you have two equally capable candidates, you really couldn't choose between the two, and you're scratching your head. You know, if you're thinking, well, actually, this person is underrepresented in our organisation in terms of their age. You know, we don't have many people at all in the, I don't know, 55 to 65 brackets, then choosing that person because they are in that age bracket would be an example of positive action, okay? Applying a pay rise to everybody who's the age of, you know, 45 to 65, you know, that would be unlawful positive action. You wouldn't be able to justify that, you know, just because they're in that age group. Pay and benefits linked with the length of service. So this is an interesting one. So we can only have increases in these things up to 5 years of continuous employment or working at a particular level for 5 years, okay? You can, though, stop insurance benefits when someone gets to pension age, but otherwise any enhancements to pay and benefits should not be related to length of service. National minimum wage. So this is interesting and often challenged by younger people. You know, it can seem like inbuilt age discrimination, but the law does allow different rates of minimum pay based on age up to 25. The government decided that this approach would actually help younger people to get into work. So this is why we have it, and this is why it is being made lawful. Now, as employers, we can choose to increase the amounts in each banding, but we have to stick to those bandings, and increases must go up using the same age bandings. We can't use our own age bandings, you know, to increase pay. The government have decided what the age bandings are, and we must not deviate from that. And then we have employing people who are under 18, okay? So this is the last example that we have on age discrimination being allowed, and of course it stands to reason. You know, we have different working time regulations, different laws about the type of work children are allowed to do, the type of breaks that young people have, holiday entitlement, and so on. Okay, so we've got a legal obligation there to treat people who are under 18 differently to people who are over 18. So those are really the bulky areas covered, actually. I just wanted to take a little look at stereotyping and ageist language as a bit of interest for us as well, just to try and bring to life the topic a little bit more as well. So just going to get your involvement again, if I may. So stereotypes, what we wanted to get you to do here is join me in thinking about what some phrases who these phrases might be associated with. So I've been on the internet and, you know, searched for stereotypical or myths about young workers and older workers, and I've put descriptions that I found into two different groups. Okay, so what I'd like to do is just ask you to have a look at these two groups, and then I'm going to put up options for you to choose which age range you think the groups are being described. Okay, so not your personal opinion, okay, but which group contains descriptions of millennials, so that's anyone born after 1984, or young workers, and which contains descriptions of older workers. Okay, so is group A young workers or older workers, or is group B young workers or older workers? So I'm just going to give you a minute to digest what's on screen, and then I'll put up the poll. And this is the last bit of involvement I'm asking you to do today. So here we go, let's launch. Which do you think is which? So was group A young workers, or was it older workers? And was group B young workers, or was it older workers? Okay, I've got half of you voted. I'm conscious of time, so just going to give you a few more seconds if you want to have a go. So 3 more seconds. Okay, great. That's most of you voted now. So let's have a look at what we've got. Wow, okay, great. So we have got 95% it's group A for young workers, and 90% group B is older workers, and we've got 5% of you on the other answers. So group A is older workers and group B is the young workers. I think this is really interesting because I'm just going to put this screen back up again. I don't know if you've thought about this yourselves, but there's some conflicting descriptions actually within the groups themselves. So, you know, group A are both lazy and have drive to progress, as thought by the general public. And, you know, some similarities between the two as well, you know, less productive, lack drive and passion, and lazy. You know, it's quite interesting. Let's move forwards and see what the answer was. So we were pretty much right. So yeah, A was young workers and B was older workers. I think the fact that we've got 95% and 90% shows that pretty much all of us are able to identify, you know, the stereotypes that exist, you know, out there about young and older workers in the UK. And that's, you know, I didn't ask you to comment on whether you thought these were your beliefs, you know, so even if you don't hold these beliefs, you know, we obviously can't escape awareness of how society expects each group to behave, you know, to some extent. So where we can all try to be conscious, you know, this is ingrained in us, you know, and although you can say that stereotypes do come from something, maybe, you know, stereotypes are not necessarily correct, you know, and can be conflicting, and they certainly, I think we could all probably agree, shouldn't influence how fairly we treat an individual in the world of work. So let's have a look at what Acas say about stereotyping, because they do give some advice on avoiding it. So it can lead us to make assumptions about someone's capability, even though it shouldn't, and it can occur without us even realising, and this is where we get unconscious bias from. So Acas give us tips on avoiding it by judging people on actual job performance, have different age groups within a team or a project with shared goals so that people of different ages are all working toward the same thing, seek different outlooks from people, and then actually value contributions from everyone, and make that visible so that we can see, lead by example. We should be valuing contributions from people of different ages. We shouldn't only value a fresh outlook, or we shouldn't only value a very experienced outlook. And encourage the swapping of knowledge, ideas, and skills. Okay. Ageist language. Let's have a little look at this. So again, I'm just going to give you some examples, and these are not words that I've come up with by myself. I thought it would be far safer for me to look them up online. So, have you seen these, heard these? Are some new to you? Some of these, they can be jokes, but sometimes they can be meant to be nasty, which is obviously not okay. Some of them we might even say about ourselves, I don't know. So these are some examples of language that you might be able to describe as being ageist. Are we being wrapped up in red tape? Are we being told, ageist language is not okay anymore? Well, of course, it's applying reasonableness to a situation, isn't it? And everybody understanding what someone intends and what they mean. Acas talk about the phrase, it was banter, which comes up a lot for me, alone speaking with employers and employees who are trying to justify themselves, in what they've said and done. I don't know if you've heard this a lot, but it is often used to cover the disparity between what was said and what was actually intended, and it's important for us to, we're aware that ageist language exists, but we do need to also be aware that it's how the words are perceived that matters more than the intention of the person who said them. Now, the intention is not irrelevant, but it's how it's perceived that matters more. So Acas give us some advice, which is pretty handy. If you feel, and you've got to try not to let your own personal opinion take precedent here, but you've got to try to be objective. What would the everyday person on the street think, about the situation? If you think that it was joking around, and that offence has been caused by mistake, then it may be appropriate to resolve any upset informally. And I would advocate that, because I think once a relationship is tense, a formal process is very unlikely to repair that, at least in the short term anyway. So if you think it was a genuine mistake and misunderstanding, go for an informal route. But, well, actually on that as well, also just ask the person who was upset's opinion, seek their agreement to try an informal approach first, so that they don't think you're undervaluing the situation, at least from their perspective. And actually, even if the person who's been upset is saying to you, no, don't worry about it, we should review the situation ourselves. And if we think, regardless of the person who's upset, regardless of what they think, if we think that the purpose was actually intentional, that this language was used maliciously or to try and embarrass or humiliate the other employee, we've got a duty to make sure that we are not allowing workplaces to develop an environment like that, okay, that we are protecting people from treatment such as that. So in those situations, we should treat this formally, and that's what Acas say. And I think that's absolutely right, and I'm sure you would all agree. I know we're a few minutes over. Hopefully you can stay with us. But links to sex and disabilities. This is another key area of the guidance, which I think is quite interesting for us to think about. So how age can be linked to sex and ACAS explain this. So they give the example that some roles require employees to work late, or to socialise after normal hours, or to work weekends or abroad. And that this can be, not definitely is, but it certainly easily could be discriminatory, because women of a certain age group are just more likely in this country than men to have caring responsibilities for children, okay, and are therefore unable to meet these requirements. Okay, so if you obligate employees to work like this, you could be indirectly discriminating against women of that age group. Okay. And this is true because it is something that tends to be a truth, that exists across the country and has done for a long time, that it is women who are more likely to look after children. And so that's why it can be indirectly discriminatory towards them, and not a man, even if he has caring responsibilities for the child. So ACAS advise that employers should be aware of the potential, okay, which I think is reasonable. Just be conscious that people, women in that age group, may be treated less favourably, whether you mean it or not. They could be being overlooked for promotions, because they aren't working these hours, or just generally. They could also be being overlooked for training, if they've got to go and pick their child up from school at a certain time or what have you. They might even be being treated less favourably because they've not got access to full-time work, because we are not offering flexible working. There is still resistance, I think, amongst employers towards flexible working. I think it's improving massively. Certainly much more open to the concept, but flexible working can have huge benefits for employers. It does mean that we're getting talent in that we wouldn't otherwise access. It can actually increase productivity, so we should be really thinking about flexible working much more than we are. They talk about menopause in this guidance as well, and there's quite a focus on it. So this usually affects women in their 40s and 50s, and effects can include insomnia, fatigue, mood swings, surges of feeling hot, struggling to remember things, struggling to concentrate and focus, and taking longer to recover from illness. Okay, so it stands to reason that these things could very easily actually influence things like attendance and capability. In terms of absence, just be conscious of the fact that actually the absence will tend to be reported as something different. They don't want to ring up and say that they're off because of, symptoms of the menopause. I doubt anyone on this, session has had that call. And if you have, then great, because you've obviously got a very open dialogue, with your employees. But I think most people would find that they've just never had that. And it can impact on women's confidence, stress, and anxiety as well. Now, it is a prevalent issue because there are over 3 million women over 50 working in Britain alone. That's just Britain. And it is sensitive, and a personal matter that might be difficult for both employers and employees to discuss. So just going back on that, that's 3 million women then who are working at the moment who have just started or are about to start the menopause, okay? So ACAS recommend that employers look at training managers and or develop a policy or strategy within their organisation to try and make sure that the workplace understands how women can be affected and how support might be provided and might be appropriate. Okay. And just a thought, but tribunals do have the potential to regard the menopause as being a disability, okay? And this will be very, very much on a case-by-case basis. It's not that it is for every woman, and in fact, it's more likely to be a minority. But if symptoms are particularly substantial and chronic, in line with the definition of a Disability in the Equality Act, then the employer would have a duty to make reasonable adjustments. Okay, and I've been reading about a case that had just this situation very recently, so it does happen. And lastly, then today, disability. Okay, so ACAS explain that age can be linked to disability because the increase of developing one does increase hugely once somebody is over 50 years old, unfortunately. Now, of course, we cannot treat someone less favourably because of this. So, you know, not giving someone the job because they might require reasonable adjustments, you know, for things like visual or hearing impairments, you know, that would not be okay. We can't take disciplinary action, you know, for absence due to a disability, such as arthritis or osteoporosis, you know, two things that can be disabilities and tend to occur in older people. You know, disciplinary action would be inappropriate. We would have to look at other approaches like medical capability. And things like not offering training or a promotion, you know, if you assume, you know, I know that person's got a condition, they're deteriorating, I don't think they're going to be capable, they're not going to want the stress, you know, us making that assumption would be wrong. You know, we've still got to have the conversation. We've got to be just transparent, I think, is really the answer, you know, about what we're offering, promotions, jobs, terms, benefits, you know, pay, what we're offering to people of a department or in a particular role that we would offer to anybody, and talk to people about how they're feeling they would cope with that, and let it be up to them whether they can cope or not. And we can always manage from a capability perspective, you know, rather than assumptions about their age or taking disciplinary action. So you've stayed in for the long haul, so I really do appreciate that. I hope you've sent over some questions. If not, and you would like to, please do drop them over to us. Our contact details are on the screen now. Please do give us a ring if you're interested in any further support or advice. I'd like to just take a moment to let you know about our HR knowledge base. So we've got an excellent resource which is available to get access to. It's got all kinds of information there about every you know, employee relations issues. We've got things like hot topics that we do monthly and newsletters about updates in the law and things like that. So it really is an excellent resource for employers who wish to check their knowledge or get advice about something. We have retained clients who have consultants assigned to them. They get all their information on there through them. If you've enjoyed this session, join us for another webinar. I'm going to try and talk about Brexit next month. I did manage to talk about it for a day a few weeks ago, so I'm sure I'll be able to discuss some things then that are relevant to employers already. So join us for that if you'd like. And also in May, we've got a webinar about workers, because of course we've got a lot of new laws coming in to shake things up that are happening now and this time next year. So if you would like to get ready for that, join us for that session. And we have a number of seminars coming up too. So I'll be there, and a number of other of my colleagues will be there to give advice and support throughout. So please do join us if you are interested in any of these. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much. Thank you for joining and taking part in the polls and questions and things today. I hope you've enjoyed it or got something out of it. And again, if there's anything I can answer for you, please do let me know. But otherwise, hopefully you'll join us again soon, and maybe I'll speak to you soon if you've sent me a question over. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.